Today, I'll continue the project that I started last week. I began to record a book that I hope this will be a book about marriage. Uh, where did I put that? Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't need it now. I finished last time what I thought was the introductory chapter of the book. That I presented to you in written form because I thought a lot about it, but now I'm going to be winging it. Each week, I will start a new chapter, and I'm simply going to lecture and then hope I can transcribe what I've lectured into written print at some point. So this is chapter two, and my tentative title for chapter two is Readiness for Marriage. I believe I mentioned last week that in order for marriage to have a chance of succeeding, there has to be a kind of emotional readiness to embrace what marriage could be and a skill set that's been learned, at least in rudimentary fashions, in order to manage what's being created, a close and intense partnership with another human being. And today I'm going to explore some things that bear on whether one has or has not achieved readiness for marriage. And I like being a storyteller, so I'll start with a story. This is a story of two people I'll call Ron and Julie, which is not their name, but I'm protecting the guilty. Ron was a fellow student of mine at UCLA after high school. I had known him a little bit in high school, but I drew closer to him when we attended UCLA together as undergraduates. We were headed in very different directions. He wanted to do something entrepreneurial, something creative. I was very happy to move towards becoming a psychologist, but we remained friends, saw each other frequently. And as was so true of members of my generation, while he was an undergraduate, he shared some classes with Julie. He met her, he began to date her. He was very enamored of her. And by the time they were sophomores, he and Julie got married. I think at that point they were probably 20 years of age. And I got married at 21. So that was quite typical back then. Half the people I went to college with were married by the time they graduated college, and most of the rest got married well before they turned 30. And we were doing what the culture expected of us. It was even said back then that young women went to college to get their MRS degree. That was the real purpose of being in college. They weren't serious about any careers. They were serious about culling through a potential pack of interesting and valuable men who could make good husbands for them. One of the things that, well, Julie was very pretty and very vivacious. I could understand why Ron would be fascinated with her. But in addition, she was the child of a very wealthy and influential person in Hollywood. And he believed, probably correctly, Ron did, that his connection with his father-in-law would be a ticket to something really special as he finished his education. He was taking some film courses, he was taking some business courses, and he didn't know exactly where he would wind up, but he knew his father-in-law had wealthy and influential friends and could probably open doors for him after graduation. Everything got derailed by the Korean War, though. We were all in trouble. Some of my friends that I grew up with had the stupid idea in the last year of high school before we got to college that they would join the Marine Reserves, because if you were in the reserves, you only had to go on active duty for 1 month a year and you went off for weekend training exercises. And they thought that they were not subject to the draft because they had registered to be in the Marine Reserve. And I kept yelling at them. They were yelling at me, come and be saved, come into the Marine Reserve with it. I said, no, you guys could get activated if things got dicey. What the hell are you doing? you're crazy. You're just going to be called to federal duty if there's a problem. And sure enough, the Korean War came and they were activated. I played that game a different way. I went into advanced ROTC at the State University, UCLA, and I was exempt from the draft as long as I was enrolled in ROTC because I was going to be commissioned as a second lieutenant when I graduated. And maybe then I would have to serve 4 years in the military. But I was in Air Force ROTC, so I wasn't worried about being in combat anywhere. I was being trained to be a supply officer. How nice! I would order materials for the base. That's what I would be doing. So I felt safe, and I felt like some of my colleagues were idiots. Well, my friend Ron also went into Air Force ROTC. He listened to me, and he was going to be commissioned as an officer. And his father-in-law did pull strings for him when we were finished, and he got his bars as a second lieutenant. Through contacts with Congress people and otherwise, he went off and he participated in making training films for pilots. That's what he did. He was like well, I don't even know what word to put on it. He was like the production coordinator for the training films, and he enjoyed the work, and he liked being around cameras, and he liked making movies of one sort or another. And he very much looked forward to being mustered out after 4 years and coming back into civilian life. Well, I dodged the bullet further because I was allowed to go on to graduate school before I was called to active duty. The Air Force needed a psychologist. And if I could get trained as a psychologist, that would be fine. They would defer my call to active duty until I'd finished that training too. But by the time I finished that training, the Korean War was over. So I never had to serve a day in active duty. I came back to Los Angeles after I graduated from graduate school, picked up my relationship with Ron again, and found to my horror and sadness that he had gotten divorced. Why had he gotten divorced? Because there were two things he didn't know about the young woman he married. One was she had a terrible problem with alcohol. And with him gone, she was drunk a good deal of the time every day. And in addition to that, when she got very drunk, she yearned for sexual connection with somebody. So she had had a variety of love affairs while he was away off in service, finishing up his commitment to the Air Force. She had managed to hold it together when he was on leave and come by on visits, but gossip started getting to him and he found out the truth of everything. And he was absolutely devastated. He felt betrayed, heartbroken. He couldn't see any way that he could go on being married to her. She wasn't doing anything about her problem with alcoholism, and she remained defiantly rebellious. What did he expect her to do with his being gone for 4 years? Was she supposed to be celibate? She didn't take any responsibility that not having been sexually faithful to him could have been harmful and hurtful to him. So they got a divorce. He then adapted something that is quite common. He would try to prevent himself from being hurt again. And he would brag, I'm never going to get married again. I couldn't go through that pain. So he would start dating somebody, spend some time with her, and then liquidate the relationship again when it started getting serious. So let me fast forward a little bit because it's to the section of his life that has relevance for what I'm trying to lecture about today. When he was in his early 30s, and so was I in my early 30s back then, he was invited to a wedding. It was a member of the family. I forgot, a cousin, I think, of his was getting married. And of course, he went to the wedding, and because he was not paired with anybody, he got seated at the singles table. That's how the bride and bridegroom had arranged seating. Couples would be at tables with other couples, and single people would be at a really big singles table that was there. And he was seated next to a young woman, seemed very delightful to him. And she flirted with him a little bit. She complimented him. She said it was a pleasure sitting next to him. And the conversation was very interesting. And the evening went on. They danced together, and he found her very compelling. And he felt turned on by her. He wanted more of her. And at the end of the evening, she said, "Here, I have a card. I have personal cards. Here's my card. I'd like to see you again. Here's my phone number. Please call me. I live in Beverly Hills and I have lots of free time." And as they parted, he gave her a little kiss and said, "Yes, I am going to call you." And she said, "Oh, no, you're not only going to call me, you're going to marry me," she said to him. And he was taken aback. He was titillated by her effrontery and taken aback by it both. And he didn't take her very seriously, but he did start to see her. And he learned that she was still a student at UCLA. She was 18 years old and he was 30. And he felt like he was robbing the cradle, but she was fascinating and vivacious and very sensual. And he said, he told me he was having the best sex with her he ever had with anybody. Back then, it was the 1960s, and her parents were left-wing liberals. They were not unhappy that their daughter was not a virgin. They wanted her to have lots of sexual experience before she settled in. They didn't care if she was at 18, was away overnight, staying with him in his house. And that was okay with them. And he went and met the parents, and they were very welcoming to him. It didn't matter to them that he was 30 and she was 18. He was a good 12 years older than she was. So after a while, she said, "You know, your house is really nice and comfortable. I'm getting old. I shouldn't be living with my parents anymore. How about I move in with you?" And he was taken aback and startled that she was so forward again. And he couldn't think of a good reason why she shouldn't. So back she came and she moved in with him. She graduated soon after that, and I forgot to mention, he had been hired by an advertising agency. That's where he went to work, and I'm changing his occupation a little, and was rising very well through the ranks of the advertising agency. They particularly liked him because he had had some film experience. He was the one that would help the people who were making the sales pitches come up with what the commercial should look like. And then he would negotiate with commercial production houses to make the actual commercials. And he would go on set while the commercial was being made. He would be the eyes and ears of the advertising agency and make sure the commercials were done well and really honored the message that he was trying to get across. And he was very successful. By the time he was in his early 30s, about the time they were coupling up, he had a beautiful house in West Los Angeles and was doing extremely well financially. Uh, After she graduated, got her BA in fine arts, she wasn't sure what she wanted to do with herself. So she said, I'm running your household for you now, and I do the marketing and I make the meals and I supervise the maid when she comes, but that's not enough for me. I'd like to do more. I think I'm going to go study interior design in the extension division at UCLA. I've always thought I'd like to make nice environments. So he had no objection. During the day when he was at work, she would go and take courses in interior design. And after she had studied for about a year, she said to him, "Well, this house has potential, but you don't know how to make this house really sizzling. And give me a budget. I'd like to redo the interior, get new furniture, change the painting, do a little bit of minor remodeling. Can you give me a budget so I can make this a really beautiful place?" And he decided to take a chance on her. And sure enough, she made the place beautiful. By the way, all of his friends loved hanging out in that house. She was a wonderful hostess, very gracious. She did good meal planning. And after she had finished on how to redecorate his house, she went and took some gourmet cooking classes because that's the next thing she was going to do. So she started to become a really wonderful hostess. he would host business meetings of one sort or another and let her entertain the people who were coming. And with her help, he was becoming a bigger and bigger power in his advertising agency. And then she said, you know what? You should branch out on your own. They're taking advantage of you. You could do the work you're doing. Your clients will come with you. Why don't you start your own agency? And she pushed him from behind. And sure enough, by the time he's in his mid 30s, he broke away from the agency where he had worked. And she helped him find space and she helped him interview potential people he'd be working with. And she insisted on decorating the office space they had moved into. And she made a really beautiful an office suite for all of them. People loved coming to that place because it was quirky and interesting and aesthetically very pleasing. So he was in paradise. Now she started saying, I think we need to get married. And he freaked for a few minutes. Oh my God, look at this. Now we're going to get married. My history is going to repeat itself. I'm going to get betrayed. I'm giving her power if I marry her. But she calmed him and soothed him and persuaded him that it would be okay. She would never be unfaithful to him. She was not interested in being unfaithful to him. They had something good between the two of them, and she would take good care of it. So he married her with fear and trembling and really enjoyed his wedding day and settled in. But then it started to get complex. She said she had done enough frippery. It was fun being a cook. It was fun decorating places, but she had a brain too, and she wanted to do something with her brain. And she thought she wanted to go to graduate school. And he said, you want to go to graduate school? She said, yes, I think I would like to get a PhD and be a college professor. And he said, well, what is it you want to study? And she said, well, the courses I love the most, even though I was a fine arts major, were anthropology courses. I think I'd like to get a PhD in anthropology. And he said, oh, all right. And she said, and in particular, I would like to specialize in archaeology. He said, oh, and she said, well, that's going to pose a problem. If I'm to get a PhD in archaeology, I have to spend at least a year as a second in command on a dig somewhere in the world, excavating some piece of past history and learning how one does archaeological research, takes care of the specimens and protects things and makes sense out of what they're looking at. It's a whole internship I have to do for a year. So I'm going to be gone for a year. And he said, no, I couldn't tolerate that. You're going to be gone for a year. She said, well, I can come back and visit once in a while. I said, who else is going to be there? Well, I'll have to attach myself to a professor, and the professor will be there most of the time. And then there are going to be probably other graduate students who are coming also because they want to take an internship in archaeology. And there may be some locals that are hired to help with the excavations too. I don't know, there'll be 15 or 20 workers there in addition to me and the prof, whoever the prof is. So are some of them going to be men? Oh, probably most of them are going to be men. I can't trust you that you're not going to fuck somebody. If you go off to some other place in the world far away from me and you're there with men only and a few women for weeks on end and I don't get a chance to see you. And he said, why can't you major in philosophy or in literature or something where you can just stay here and go to school from our home and get your PhD in something else? No, but I want to be an archaeologist. And they started to have bitter fights, each one trying to persuade the other that what the other wanted to do was the path forward. And he would come and talk to me plaintively. I'm just too scared. Since I'm paying for this, I just want to lay down the law. I'm not going to fund her graduate education in archaeology. I'll fund any number of agreed upon things she can get a PhD in that we'll have to agree to. But she's going to stay here and she's going to live here every day. That's my terms and conditions. And he said, what do you think of that? I said, not much. I said, you are between a rock and a hard place. I said, you probably have the clout and the political position to crush her yearning and to tell her you're not going to give her what she wants. what is that going to gain you? She's going to be terribly hurt. She's going to be sulky. She's going to be turned inwards. She may be heartbroken, like you're taking away her dream of what her future is to be, and she may get very angry with you. I don't know. She may even leave you if you give her that ultimatum. That is really risky. Or you could try and contain your panic, your fear that you're going to be betrayed. You can go. You're have free time. You're the boss of the agency. You can take a week off here and there. You can go join her on the dig for a week at a time occasionally and pitch in and help with the digging and be there. You got money, you can bring her home from the dig occasionally, even if it's halfway around the world for long weekends with you, and reestablish your connection with her. And you can take the chance that she might actually be faithful to you for that year and not betray you, and she'll honor you, I think, and there won't be a problem. The only problem will be your terror of what you lived through before. But she is not the same woman that you were married to before, and maybe you could take that risk. So he finally decided to do it, and she was on a dig in Turkey, not too far from the Turkish coastline. Very beautiful place. It was very rugged and very rural and out from anywhere, but very beautiful. Everybody would go surfing at the end of the day because the waves were good at the beach and there was nobody around. And he did visit her several times, and she did come home periodically to be with him, and she was fine. Fast forward, she's now in her late 30s. She gets her degree, and now the next crisis comes up. What now? She said, well, I have a PhD in anthropology with a minor in archaeology, and I very much want to get a faculty position. There are no openings at any of the local universities. I have some interest because of my dissertation topic from the faculty at NYU. Would you consider moving your agency or closing it or doing something, but coming to New York with me if I was offered a faculty position? And too much of him was the traditional man. No, I'm not going to dislocate my whole career that's unfolding so wonderfully for both of us just because you need a faculty position here somewhere in the world and I have to follow you. I'm not the kind of man that's going to follow his wife somewhere. And again, more disputes, more bitterness, more arguing between the two of them. This time he stuck to her guns and she surrendered, and he convinced her that maybe she could get at least an adjunct teaching position in one of the local universities, and she could do some teaching even if she's not going to be a core faculty person. And there's no reason why she can't keep taking her doctoral research, writing some articles that she could have published and keep her chops in the educational world, even though she was not a full-time prof anywhere. So that's what they did. And in her late 30s, a position opened at one of the local universities. And yes, she became a full-time faculty member in anthropology at a local university. Now the last thing came up, or the next to last thing it was actually. She said, I've accomplished everything I wanted to. I'm positioned perfectly. I think we ought to have a serious conversation before it's too late about whether we're going to become parents. And he said, become parents? And she said, yes, I have eggs still. I'm getting into my later 30s. I don't know how long I'm going to remain fertile, but we at least ought to explore the possibility. He said, I never thought of myself as becoming a parent. She said, well, try it on for size. So a bunch of debates, dialogues, trying to assess what the lifestyle is they would have, how she would manage her career, what he would do to help if he could. And at last, she got more passionate about it. And this time he acceded to her wishes and decided they would become parents. And sure enough, soon after her 39th birthday, she gave birth to a little girl. And much to his surprise, he fell in love with his daughter. He had never expected to have this kind of visceral reaction to holding a little female baby, but he adored her. And I smiled and I thought, what a wonderful couple. They've twisted and turned and resolved disputes between the two of them and taken on challenges of all kinds, and they're still together. And they now have created an entire family. The next generation is nested in their home. And I thought they would ride off into the sunset. Ha! He was 12 years older, I guess, when she was 39, and he became a father. He was 51 already. Yeah, he was about 55. A young woman came to work in his agency with him. It turned out, he told me finally, he had a secret. He was starting to have an affair with her. And he left his wife for the younger woman when he was 55 years old and busted up the family he had created. And my head spun. It was about the last outcome I ever expected to hear for this couple. So that's my story. That's my lead into what I'm going to be talking about. And I should have, well, now, if I was the age I am now, I would have been skeptical. I would have been skeptical of their chances of surviving for many decades because this was not a marriage. This is something that I have called an adoption that was posing as a marriage. There was a big age difference between the two of them. He was already settled in his career path, in charge of her own life. She was still living at home with her parents when she coupled up with him. It was apparent to me now in retrospect that she was living out her late adolescence and her early adulthood with him as the surrogate parent who was watching over her, taking care of her, and making it possible for her to experiment with many things. If I were to see this couple now, I would think that there was a thing she probably did not experiment with, that she should have experimented with. She did have several sexual partners prior to her turning 18, but when she fashioned on him, she remained loyal to him. I don't know if she did enough experimentation with enough different kind of people before she finally settled in. But clearly, she still was working out many things. She wasn't certain what career, if any, she would follow. She wasn't clear about what place in the world she was going to live out, what she was really going to wrap her head around doing for herself as her calling in the world, what contributions she wanted to make, whether or not she wanted to enter into parenthood. There were so many unsolved questions. And he was to be the steadfast one who made her experimentation, her daydreaming, her trying on alternatives possible. And what happens if you adopt a late adolescent and they get ready to enter adulthood fully? Most typically, they leave home. They don't turn around and marry you and want to be with you. They want to go out in the world and spread their wings on their own, because that's another part of becoming fully adult, to be accountable only to oneself. That she never did. So I'm surprised they got as far as they did. That's a testimony to their essential decency and willingness to engage with each other. But I think there was a terrible built-in flaw in this marriage. I shouldn't have been surprised that it came apart. And I would say at least 20% of the marriages made in this country are adoptions that are posing as marriages. There may not be nearly the same age differential as there was between these two, but some people, adolescence is a state of mind and a state of being, not necessarily a chronological age. There are many people that are in arrested development. They didn't get good enough parenting, so they need a very mature, very steady, very supporting other who will take over now and allow them to finish what they needed to explore and what they need to have by way of parenting from a surrogate parent rather than from their actual parents. Their actual parent or parents have failed them. Looked at in another fashion, the phenomenon I'm talking about, I want to quote from Eric Berne, a psychiatrist who wrote some wonderful books about human engagements of one sort or another. In his book, Transactional Analysis, he says that in any intimate relationship, the participants in that relationship need to move freely between and play one of three roles. Sometimes they need to be parental. That's for all of us. Sometimes our partners, if we choose to make a partnership, are done in, exhausted, under terrible stress, not functioning well, and they need a lot of caretaking. And we have to be quasi-parental with them while they regress and fall apart and become much more infantile. At other times, the roles need to reverse. The person who's been the parent now comes under strain of some kind or another, is not functioning as well, needs extra attention, extra kindness, extra affection, extra time, extra goodness from the partner. So the first person who was once for a period of time, the child now has to become the parent, and the roles switch and reverse. And at other times, probably most of the time, in a reasonable, functioning, ongoing partner relationship, the people are equals. They're like friends. They're good friends to each other, good companions to each other, without a big differential about who's in charge and who's ministering to whom. They're just enjoying life in a very transactional fashion, as person to person, at an equivalent level of wisdom and power. In the story that I was telling you, that was not possible. My friend Ron was stuck in the parental role. And in one way or another, even though Peggy could be a charming young late adolescent, early adult, she was still learning how to become under his ministration and with his tutelage and his forbearance and his caretaker. They were stuck. They were stuck in those roles and didn't move, unable to move beyond them. The metaphor I sometimes use with my clients, this is very much like having a stringed instrument with three strings, and both he and she were only playing on one of the strings. They were making music together, but it was very constricted and problematic music. They couldn't make the fullness of the sounds that are available to a couple that can move through those positions as required that Eric Berne talked about. All right, I'll take a look at the clock. A memory came to me while I was lecturing. Hermine and I made our second marriage with each other when I was 39 and 34. She was 34. In order to get married in the state of California, as in most places, you have to have a marriage license. So what you do is you go and stand in line waiting for the clerk who issues marriage licenses. And we were feeling romantic that day. We were holding hands while we were standing in line. We were kissing each other every once in a while. And we're looking at the other people standing in line in front of us and behind us. And it was mind-boggling in some way. It was hard for us to identify anybody who was there that looked joyous in any way. The great mass of people who were there were pimply-faced teenagers, and mainly accompanied by adults. And we thought, oh my God, somebody's gotten, quote, knocked up and they're having to get married because the young girl must be pregnant. And that's certainly not a joyous occasion we're bearing witness to. And there were older people who looked quite sullen, and we couldn't figure out what they were troubled about and what they were doing there anyhow. But the absence of many people who seemed to be really delighted about what they're doing was quite shocking and upsetting to us. We were worried. We come on the wrong day? Is this going to cast a hex on us? Is there bad feng shui in this office and we're going to get poisoned by it? We were partly laughing and then kissing again while we were having this discussion, whispered discussion with each other. So I will go on. What do I know about this thing called readiness for marriage? One of the things is what I've already described. The two parties have to be on a reasonably same developmental level. They must have ripened into a state of readiness for marriage, and they're able to move freely between the three roles that Berne describes in his book. They can do it all. They're ready to do it all. Now, there is the literature I'm very fond of quoting from those who study the family life cycle and those who study individuals' life cycle. Uh, all of those who are reading this or listening to this is in verbal form today should appreciate that there are two kinds of developmental psychologies. There are developmental psychologies that are focused on a single individual. What are the challenges that come up in any single individual life from the moment of birth until the last great challenge when we have to somehow come to some accommodation with the fact that we're going to die? Are there predictable crises along the path that are general for the human race? What's the nature of those crises? What has to happen for the people making the transit to get through those crises well? Then there are a group of family systems developmental psychologists who treat the family as a living organism. Are there predictable nodes of distress and transformation that come up in the life of any family? What do the family members have to do to navigate through the transition and get out on the other side? And how many such transitions are normative and should be expected as we move from being a baby in a family towards leaving home? Well, leaving home is one of the crises on the way when we leave the bosom of the nuclear family in which we were born and go out into the world as single young adults. Then maybe we create our own families and have to have our own children. There are family life dilemmas that come after leaving home. But I'm going to focus on leaving home right now because that is the thing that one must do effectively in order to come into what I would call a state of readiness to consider marriage. If one has not left home successfully, then one is not ready to carry out the duties, responsibilities, and navigate through the challenges of building an intimate partnership with another human being. Too much energy is still embedded back in the family of origin. The two principles that are necessary to navigate through leaving home, as the family systems theorists would say to us, the first principle is taking emotional responsibility for the self. We are no longer embedded in a structure where our parents are responsible for emotionally soothing us, being the critical people in our lives, providing nurturance to us, providing companionship to us. We are leaving that behind. Usually, the peer group is the life raft from which we sail away from the ship we're abandoning. We start in early adolescence to collect peers that become almost like members of a surrogate family for us. After a while, we take our secrets to our peers and not to our parents and start putting a barrier between ourselves and our parents as we get ready to separate from them. And when we finally leave home, if we've done a good job, we have our peers around, some of whom may be our apartment partners, some of whom are certainly going to be our companions, as Ron and I were for each other, as we struggle to make our lives as single adults, and as we begin to confront, do we want to take up the challenge of finding a life partner or not? So taking emotional responsibility to have companionship, to be a good companion to others outside of the family, and to build connections with people outside of the family so we are nourished by those connections. That's one of the things we have to accept as an essential principle in leaving home effectively. Otherwise, we're going home all the time to either fight, get soothed, or whatever we used to do with our family continues to be the rituals of human connectedness we have, and we don't fully become ready to let a stranger in our life and to build something with the stranger. But the second thing we have to accept responsibility for is financial responsibility for the self. Unfortunately, in almost every place in the world now, except places where there's still clans that live in close connection with each other, capitalist rituals obtain. And in order to be fully in control of decision making and choice making and directing one's own life, one has to have one's own income stream. And it has to be sufficient to support and take care of whatever are the moves we're beginning to explore as a single young adult. You can see with Ron and Julie that it did not work out well for Julie because she was totally dependent on her husband's income for the longest time. And she had to fight with him, and she couldn't just do what she wanted to do when she wanted to do it with her own funds because she didn't have ever any own funds. It was very much like a teenager wanting an allowance from a parent again to convince her husband to fund whatever it was she wanted to undertake. We are not fully free to become whatever we need to become as an adult unless we can finance that. And unfortunately, there are too many parents who continue to subsidize the young adult generation, and they use financial strings also to influence them or to control them. And that has to be moved beyond before one comes significantly ready to be in a marriage. The thing that has to happen in the individual life cycle, I've been talking about reorganizing the relationship with the family, the individual life journey that has to be mastered in order to come into a state of readiness to have a significant other is the one that Erik Erikson calls identity versus role diffusion. Adult teenagers are very busy trying to forge their identities. To use a metaphor I've talked to my partners here on other occasions about, what is an identity? Identity, I think of almost like a spinal cord. It's the bony process that's sturdy that allows one to stand erect and to march out of the family home on one's own 2 feet in a sturdy fashion. One does not have to fall apart. One does not have to retreat back to the house over and over again. An ingrown sturdiness has been created that allows one to stand apart, stand aloof, and to stand alone. And parts of it may not be wonderful, but at least it's tolerable and manageable. And the backbone of an identity is like a bridge cable. It's not a single strand. It's the weaving together of 5 strands that have to come to some reasonable completion during teenage years. The first strand of identity, Erikson called a sense of historicity, HISTORICITY. Even though English was a second language, he could sometimes be quite poetic. What he meant by a sense of historicity is that there's a riddle that children now are eager to resolve. The riddle is, who am I? How did I get here? What brought my parents together? Where did they come from? And how did they arrive and meet each other and find each other and decide to create me? That whole journey out of nothingness into having been born into a family structure fascinates young people. If you try and tell them stories about all that when they're younger, they're bored, their eyes glaze over. It's a topic of little interest. When they get into adolescence, now it becomes interesting. Their grandparents become interesting. If their grandparents migrated to where they are from some other place, they want to hear the story of the migration. Why did that happen? Why was the decision made to come to this place at this time? If there was an immigration experience, that fascinates them too. They often would be happy to be taken on journeys to go visit places where members of the family used to be if they're not there anymore. Trips abroad to see where the family descended from, what kind of village the family lived in before it came to the United States are wonderful adventures for teenagers. They like participating in those adventures. So the question of who am I? How did I come to be here in this time and in this place? And who are the others around me that have come together to create my life? Take on a burning interest. And those who fail to get good answers or answers that are satisfying if there are secrets that are being kept, somehow sense the presence of those secrets, and some of their forward thrust into their adult life is retarded by the presence of those secrets. Some of the people who have the most trouble with this are adopted. They are cut off from some knowledge of their forebears. Open adoption is becoming more common in the United States now, where the young children actually get a chance to meet biological parents and talk to them and have them even as part of the clan that's being created. But that's a fairly novel and new development in American culture. Still, far too many adoptions are being made where the children only have fragments of information about who their forebears were, why they came to be born, and how the stream of history brought them to this time and this place. And they will show signs of confusion in adulthood. They find it hard to pair up with other people, and they find it hard to pick occupations. There's part of them that is not rooted enough to allow them to do the other work that is required of them. The second strand of identity is altruism. Uh, Erikson borrowed this from Anna Freud. She believed that the hallmark of a well-lived adolescence is a young person who's eager and enthusiastic about the world. Yes, the world has many flaws. An effective, undamaged adolescent, however, will see the flaws and will treat the older generation as if they compromised too much. They sold out. They were not pure. They didn't pursue the goodness that's possible. They didn't see the solutions that should be undertaken. And adolescents who are marching through their adolescence with that kind of altruism have a great sense of eagerness to proceed. They personally are going to succeed, and their generation are going to reverse and undo so much of the damage and mistakes that the older generation is currently making. They can't wait to be trusted with more authority and to take over, because they can see the corruption, the cynicism, and the stupid pragmatism of those of us who are in charge of the world at this point. And they think we are making a mess of it that needs not to be made, and they're going to do much better. If you don't have a child that you're raising as a teenager who sneers at your incompetence and the ways you sold out, you're not raising a wonderful and healthy teenager. So just acknowledge how stupid you've been and wish them well and hope that they do much better. uh, the third strand of identity is voice. The object relation psychoanalysts tell us that every serious experience we've had, the other human beings, the relationship that's going on around the serious experience gets taken inside of us. And we have a cacophony of memories of interactions with others that we live with for the rest of our lives. We hear many voices. We hear the voices of people that hurt us. We visit those memories. We hear the voices of people who sustained us and comforted us, and we take those memories with us. And sometimes, if we're in a challenge or in a great complexity, we have what I've come to call a critics committee yelling at us inside, a bunch of voices that are telling us turn left, other voices are telling us don't do anything, some other voices are comforting and reassuring, saying you'll get through this somehow, and on and on. We drown in the noise inside of ourselves, particularly at times of great challenge and ambiguity. What is needed and what is developing slowly across adolescence is a voice that's our own voice. We gradually weave it together, we gradually give birth to it. But for the longest time, we treat the world as if it's a popularity or a public opinion polling place. If we have a serious decision to make, like for a young woman, should I go with Ben to the prom? Somebody else may ask me. I have mixed feelings about Ben. Ben, should I go? They have to poll 10 other people to ask them what the other people think of whether they should go with Ben. Or their mama said she get a new dress for the holiday season. What color dress should she buy? She needs to know what other people think are a good color on her. It's endless. Anytime there's a decision to be made, if it has any heft whatsoever, the public opinion polling has to go on. And only slowly do we start hearing our own voice. That process doesn't come to an end fully, I think, until the mid 30s, actually. So the 20s are still full of it, but increasingly and stronger, at least by the end of adolescence, there should be the beginnings of a voice that says something that's recognizable as one's own internal voice. That voice may not be trusted sufficiently yet. There still needs to be to hear from other people, but the beginnings of the voice has to be present by the end of adolescence, or one is not fully moving into adulthood, young adulthood, and getting ready to make choices and stand up for the possibility of creating a partnership. The fourth strand of identity is occupational identity. What am I going to do with my future? I'm in school now. I don't have to make much choices. Maybe a few choices between taking this class or that class, or this teacher or that teacher. But eventually, I'm going to be asked to take up some place in the world. And if I'm to become economically independent and have inherit the power to run my own life, if I don't have a trust fund and somebody not already left me a lot of money, I not only have to work, but I have to do some work that will generate sufficient income. And we now have a choice in our culture. We have a whole variety of things that can be done. So maybe can I be lucky enough to find something I actually enjoy doing? What would that be? Be wonderful to get paid for something that gives me a kick to show up for work for. It's supposed to be possible in this culture. What would that be like? So there is the beginning of daydreaming about possible careers. It probably started even in elementary school. I'm going to be a fireman, or I'm going to be an astronaut. Or I even knew a kid at age 5 who knew that he was going to be a neurological surgeon. That was going to be his career when he grew up. So we're beginning to experiment in daydreams about possibilities, and we're beginning to screw around with academic courses that are necessarily part of the ladder that one has to mount to get to those academic objectives. May only be I'm going to go to community college and learn aircraft maintenance. That's an honorable career to go to. It pays more than most middle class jobs, by the way. And it's a blue collar job. Our culture is going to grow more and more of those. So the beginnings of trying to plan for occupational identity need to be made. But I don't like kids who are so locked in, they know for sure what they're going to do by the time they graduate high school. They haven't experimented enough. They haven't thought about enough. They haven't let their imagination go through possibilities enough. That's one of the things I want to compliment Julie about, the young woman who was in an adoption posing as a marriage. She got serious about being a homemaker. She then got serious about being a hostess. She got serious about being an interior designer. She did a variety of things well. And then it dawned on her, her ultimate destination was to be an academic and a professor. And that one stuck. She became a tenured professor at the university she was going to go to. And she always enjoyed her work. Oh, I failed to mention, I have to reorganize this chapter. After Ron left Julie, Julie sought my professional services. She wanted to go into therapy to manage her adjustment to life as a single mother, to get ready to maybe enter the dating world again, and maybe she could create an additional person in the household to help her raise her stepchild. And I kept her company by about 2 years until she remarried, and then she said goodbye to me. But she loved her work. That was a constant. She had done well putting her occupational identity together. The fifth strand of identity is sexual identity. What is the nature of my gender identity? Am I bisexual? Am I heterosexual? Am I fluid? Am I confused? Am I a transvestite? Am I transsexual? Am I kinked up with some fetish? What is my sexuality like? And do I have the courage to begin to pursue it and to experiment with it? Uh, Unfortunately, there's still big sections of the public that are told that some forms of sexuality are evil and they're not to be engaged in at all. There are some portions of the culture we live in that says whatever is your sexuality, you don't do that until you get married. You have to have a partner. And then you have a ticket to become fully sexual. You might fool around a little bit, but that's not even wise because you might get tempted to do more if you start fooling around. And finally, we do terrible things to the sexuality of women. We teach women as they're entering through their adolescence and should begin experimenting that they shouldn't be sluts. Sex shouldn't be so important to them. Sex is for men mainly, and their sexuality is or their lesbian partners. Their sexuality is to reward their partner for good behavior. Sex isn't that important to any right thinking female. And so a large number of women never start down the road of masturbation, even. They turn themselves off, they crush their own masturbation. They don't masturbate till they get into their 20s and start repairing the damage that's been done to them. Or they don't masturbate at all for the rest of their lives. And that's clearly one of the first steps on the road to learning about their bodies, what kind of imagery occurs to them while they're masturbating, what kind of partner do they daydream about. And I'm almost out of time. I will just mention successive steps. They go from masturbation, and their first attempts at connecting with a partner are crushes. They have a crush on some distant figure. They begin to imagine what it would be like to hug that person or kiss that person, but they don't have the courage to go do anything. Crushes give way to more contact, the beginnings of conversations with a preferred partner. But in the beginning, it's bitchy, it's full of teasing rather than straightforward talk. You're really a nice person and I like talking to you. No, they'll tease instead. They'll pinch and try and drive the other person away as well as invite them to come closer. Then by middle adolescence, there's the beginning of actually spending quiet time talking to somebody who could be potentially of a kind of person who might make a partner someday. An actual dating behavior and conversation starts somewhere before the end of high school. I think the figures are about 68% of males have consummated some full act of sexuality with some potential partner, and about 48% of females have consummated some full act of sexuality with some partner. And then on to college. By the time one is fully ready, the fifth strand of identity is probably not going to come to closure until early adulthood. And that means there has been a succession of possible persons with whom one has been fully sexual. One has tried to learn about how bodies work. One has penetrated orifices. One has experimented with alternative forms of trying to be tender with somebody and has some beginning competency of being a reasonable sexual partner. If all of these things come into being, then one has achieved what I have described as readiness for marriage. Again, I want to repeat, I don't think anybody necessarily has to get married. But if one has not achieved readiness for marriage, the prospect of making a marriage when one is not ready is not a good prospect and certainly contributes to the number of marriages that come apart and fail in dismal fashions. So that's it. I'll stop for today. I did get a whole chapter recorded in some way. I'm sure I'm going to toy with it when I have a transcription, but that's my second chapter. I will go on to the third chapter next week. And please unmute yourselves and respond in any way you want.
I have a comment and a question, Arthur. The comment, I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and this was a guy I knew years ago, and he is a consultant for healthcare, and he's
Yeah.
been that for a long time. And he had mentioned that he knew of a course that was developed, I think it was at Stanford, where students would explore what they wanted to be when they grew up, and in terms of career. And in some ways, the course was so popular, it was like standing room only.
Yeah. We that's the thing that makes me so sad. We do not teach the most important things that kids need to learn about as they move towards adulthood. That's an example. How should you go about experimenting so you can choose a career path wisely? That's a
Yeah.
wonderful topic.
And
How
Yeah.
do
how can
you?
you even choose at 18 to really
Yeah,
know what you want to do the rest of your life?
you can certainly choose what you're going to do next and start experimenting with.
Yeah.
And what
Mhm.
are the signs you made a bad choice and should think about liquidating the choice?
That'd be
Starting.
helpful.
The other question that I had was the example of the adoption marriage.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there are certainly some good exceptions to the rule of kind of like being kind of a more kind of an equivalent age and stage in life, where in some way someone who is 10 or 12 years younger, there is an accommodation that's made, to each other, and it ends up where in some ways they're good partners forever.
Uh, the good part of what happened was, what's the name I gave him? Ron turned out to be able to twist and turn and to accommodate to her developing and growing needs somehow, and to continue. He was a good parent. He did raise her properly and allow her to reach adulthood. So I thought, in retrospect, with the kind of lenses of the glasses I'm looking at this relationship with, I thought this would be the exception to the rule. I said the most likely outcome, if it's an adoption that's posing as a marriage, is the younger person finishes growing up successfully. If the relationship has been nourishing and supportive, becomes fully ready for a marriage, but then leaves home to go find a different partner with. That's the most common outcome. But I would say 20, 30, 40% of the time, the person might turn around and marry the person he or she is already married to. It's not doomed to failure. It just has a
Mhm.
higher expectancy of not working.
What's
Mhm.
interesting in that case was she matured in essence beyond him.
That's
That
right. He
yeah,
got scared when he started to get older that he had to contend with the fact that he needed to start thinking about what the loss of capacity and dying was like. So he wanted to run off with somebody. I've heard men describe this as he looked in her young face, it allowed him to feel younger and more vital. He was too scared of dying. He was
yeah,
failing at another developmental stage and wrecked his marriage to try and comfort himself.
yeah.
Hmm. I I have something absurd to say. I
Of
love
course.
this stuff. I guess I'll have to put that in my book.
That's not so absurd.
All right, so we're not going to meet next week. We're going to meet 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
What are you going off to do? Oh, you're going off to something delightful. I, I,
Well,
I assume you're going to have a delightful time watching a bunch of young people dance.
and it'll be a full day of that.
Does it get tedious?
I would assume so.
You'll
How
have to
much
find
how much
out.
of the time will your daughter be actually dancing?
Well, I think she's going to be taking some classes, and then I think that there are a couple performance, the performances that she has. So, and then I don't know if there's going to be some sort of ceremony at the end of the night or something like that as well. So,
Thank you very much for being a good daddy. That's really
yeah.
wonderful that you'll subordinate yourself and squirm in your seat, putting up with whatever you're going through to show support and kindness to your daughter.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I will close with one of the hallmarks of being a grandparent, which neither one of you have arrived at that destination yet. One of the hallmarks is you must buy many boxes of Girl Scout cookies.
Well, it could be worse. As long as they're Thin Mints, it's okay.
Have a good weekend.
Okay. You too.
We'll see you guys.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.